Good evening. Very, very warm welcome to everybody. I'm Rowley Keating. I'm Chief Executive here at the British Library, and it is a pleasure to see you all here for the presentation of the PEN Pinter Prize 2017. And I think all of us at the library are very, very proud to have partnered and been the host for this event since its start in 2009. And I have to say, on a personal note, I'm especially thrilled with this year's honoree, a writer whose work I first discovered and came to love and admire when I was a junior BBC researcher working for Paul Muldoon in Belfast in the early 1980s. And it's lovely to welcome Michael Longley back here for his second appearance in this theatre, having delivered a very fine Sebald lecture here about translating the classics back in February, which maybe some of you will have seen. As ever at the library, it is a particular pleasure also to be hosting every year an event in honour of the memory of Harold Pinter, and indeed to welcome Antonia back to this auditorium. As many of you will know, we as an institution had a close and deeply valuable relationship with Harold. He of course spoke in this theatre. His legacy is with us constantly here in the archives, that extraordinary, rich, voluminous collection which is made available now to researchers in perpetuity. Includes, of course, the notes for his Nobel speech, whose spirit, I feel, informs what happens here each year. This is really a celebration, above all, of the power of writers and writing, those who take the risk to communicate their beliefs, what Harold called that unflinching, unswerving gaze. There's an international dimension too, of course, to the prize and to what happens here tonight, and that's very close to us as well. Here at the British Library, we feel we are one of the world's great homes of writing across all cultures, languages, and indeed across time. We're literally built on books and writing. 4 stories 25 metres below your feet are the stores of the British Library. So that is our foundation. Writing is our foundation. And it is a pleasure, therefore, to have such a long-standing and deep partnership and friendship with English PEN, who do such remarkable work. So I have no more duties tonight other in that context to introduce, to really set the scene for this evening's events and to introduce this year's prize, the President of English PEN, Maureen Freely.
Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of English PEN and Lady Antonia Fraser to this year's PEN Pinter Award ceremony. As you've already heard, this is the 9th year of the award, founded in the memory of Harold Pinter, to celebrate writing that fulfills Pinter's vision in his Nobel Prize speech of our obligation as citizens and writers to define the real truth of our lives through unflinching, unswerving, fierce intellectual determination. We're delighted to be holding this ceremony once again at the British Library, which, as you just heard, holds Pinter's unique archive. Pinter was a vice president of English PEN. He worked tirelessly throughout his life to advance our defense of freedom of expression for writers and readers in this country and throughout the world. He set a high bar for the rest of us, as we who have served as judges for this prize are only too aware. For to walk in Pinter's footsteps, it is not enough to write great words. There is the obligation to defend and celebrate the right to use them to speak truth to power, on the page and off the page as citizens of the world. It was my privilege to chair the judging panel this year, and I wish to thank Antonia Fraser, Tom Gatti, Polly Stenham, and Don Patterson for their good judgment in selecting Michael Longley as the winner of the 2017 PEN Pinter Prize. For me and for all of us, he embodies the spirit of that prize. Deeply rooted in lived experience and the natural world, the here and now, his poetry is epic, Homeric, in its music, its reach, and its artistic purpose. As he himself once said, though the poet's first duty must be to his imagination, he has other obligations, and not just as a citizen. He would be inhuman if he did not respond to tragic events in his own community, and a poor artist if he did not seek to endorse that response imaginatively. His friend Seamus Heaney once described him as the custodian of griefs and wonders. He has been my custodian too. When my father was dying last April, it was a poem by Michael Longley that saw me through. It may be familiar to many of you. Its title is The Design. Sometimes the quilts were white for weddings, the design made up of stitches and the shadows cast by stitches. And the quilts for funerals? How do you sew the night? I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Michael Longley, for bringing wonder to my grief. I would also like to thank the British Library and Roly Keating, Chief Executive, for hosting the award. The prize would not be possible without the generosity of its funders, and I would like to thank the Blavatnik Family Foundation, Ruth Maxted, and the Thompson Family Charitable Trust. I would also like to thank Faber and Faber, which publishes the winner's speech each year for us in a limited edition pamphlet that you'll be able to take home with you at the end of the evening. Special thanks are due to the cartoonist Martin Rosen, who traditionally draws a cartoon on a cricketing theme in homage to Harold Pinter, and this is presented to the winner. And the winner is obliged to laugh. Thanks also to Dottie Irving, Truda Sprute, Alice Furs, and Hannah Davis of 4 Coleman Getty for helping us publicize the prize. The PEN Pinter Prize asked the winner, in association with English PEN's Writers at Risk program, to choose a fellow international writer to share the prize. Michael Longley will announce the winner later in the evening. But now it's my great pleasure to invite Professor Eamon Duffy to the stage to introduce this year's winner. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you. I was delighted but slightly bemused to be invited to pronounce tonight's encomium on Michael Longley. He's a very dear friend, and it's a privilege to be involved in honouring him with the PEN Pinter Prize. But a Cambridge history don is not the obvious choice for the job. However, I hope that what I lack in literary qualification I can make up for in admiration and affection. I've been lucky enough over the last 30 or 40 years to enjoy the friendship of 3 great poets, Geoffrey Hill, Seamus Heaney, and Michael Longley. Since this is neither Celebrity MasterChef nor the Great British Bake Off, you won't expect me to rank them. And time and mortality, those inexorable judges, have in any case sent 2 of the 3 contestants home. But Michael, thank God, is still with us and still serving up words for us delectably. And delectable is a Longley word. Michael Longley is a great war poet, a great love poet, a great elegist, and latest, but emphatically not least, an exquisite nature poet. His rapt attention to the plant, animal, and bird life of his beloved Carrigskeay Waun have embedded the landscape of that part of Mayo as enduringly in the geography of our imagined Ireland as Joyce's Dublin, Tomás Ó Crowan's Arran, or Heaney's Anahorish. But in the context of this prize, it's as a war poet that Michael's stature is most obvious, and the distinctiveness of his poems about violence comes, I think, from the interaction of 3 things. First, and most personally, his lifelong engagement with his father's experience in the trenches of the First World War. Secondly, his grief and civilized outrage at the violence of his native province, what he's memorably called the sick counties, poisoned through most of our lifetimes by atrocity and sectarian violence. and finally, his extraordinary imaginative access to the world of Homer's Iliad. Michael seems to me unequivocally the poet who has written most powerfully, most unflinchingly, but also most tenderly about the terrible years of the Troubles, their desperate reality sharpened, not blurred, by being so often refracted by him through a Homeric lens. I think of The Butchers, that amazing given poem written in a single feverish night of inspiration, in which the slaughter of Penelope's suitors stands surrogate for the brutality of contemporary Ulster. By contrast, there's the unforgettable blend of realism and tenderness in that wonderful sonnet, Ceasefire, published a few days after the IRA decommissioned their weapons, with its haunting final couplet, I get down on my knees and do what must be done, and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son. If I had time, I would dwell here on the many poems in which Michael has transfigured horror by a compassionate, humane, but unblinking gaze. Everyone here will have their own list, but I think of The Civil Servant, The Linen Workers, The Ice Cream Man, and perhaps greatest of all, Wounds, which begins with his father's recollections of the dead of the First World War and ends with the evocation of a murdered Ulster bus conductor, shot through the head by a shivering boy who wandered in before they could turn the television down or tidy away the supper dishes. To the children, to a bewildered wife, I think, sorry, missus, is what he said. What do I most value about Michael's work? Well, too much to say in a short space. His extraordinary ability to surprise with unsurprising words. What other poet has done such wild things with domesticated words like cozy, dozy, boozy, comfy, or snooze? What other modern poet has used catena and lists of names to such poignant effect? Ice cream flavors, the common names of wildflowers, or the villages of the Cambridgeshire Fen country. Who else has his extraordinary ability to startle us into perception by yoking together the gross and the delicate? His own appearance has been described as a cross between Ernest Hemingway and Father Christmas, and the same mixture of ruggedness and sweetness constantly electrifies his verse. The scruffy loveliness of sea asters, a donkey hobbling away on painful slippers, the agreeably shitty smell of a pet rabbit in a cardboard box with its turds like a broken rosary, or the birds eating mistletoe berries in Angel Hill, then wiping their sticky bums on the treetops to give us, in an inimitable Longley-esque juxtaposition, shit on the branches and then pale berries. I've no time to talk about Michael's many tender poems of friendship and lament, his nature poetry with its extraordinary ability to evoke the lovely fragility of living things. No time to discuss his love poetry, though these are all marvelously present in his new book, Angel Hill, not least in the two-line and very endearing picture of himself in bed with the brainy one, as he likes to call his wife Edna. Your intelligence snoozes next to mine. Poems accumulate between our pillows. Everyone here is impatient to hear Michael himself speak, so I will end. But out of 40 or 50 constant favorites, I can't resist the temptation to read you just one short poem. It's one of the many in which Michael evokes memories of his father and of the dead of the First World War to extraordinary effect. The artists who give the poem its title are two great Irish painters who served as war artists. So here is Painters. John Lavery rescued Self-Heal from the waste ground at Sailly-Saillisell in 1917 and framed one oblong flower head packed with purple flowers shaped like hooks, a survivor from the battlefield. When I shouldered my father's coffin, his body shifted slyly and farted and joined up again with rotting corpses, old pals from the trenches. William Orpen said, "You couldn't paint the smell." Michael, for all your mastery of language and for your wise and warm humanity, we salute you. I'd now like to introduce Antonia Fraser, who will present Michael with the PEN Pinter Prize 2017, after which he will deliver his address entitled Songs for Dead Children.
Can we share? Ladies and gentlemen, it's a special pleasure. Harold and I paid one never-to-be-forgotten visit to Northern Ireland, and Michael, what classical reference can I make to the fact, were you Ganymede? We certainly lifted a glass or two. But anyway, during that time, and Harold, I should say, had always been a great admirer of Michael's poetry, long before he met him, and this is not something Harold ever faked. And poetry, I think, arguably the most important thing in his life. Anyway, during this tour, being shown the places, the names, I've never forgotten the propinquity of it all. Michael said this wonderful thing, implying things were getting better. We're building with glass again. And this became a phrase that Harold and I used. We're building with glass again. So it gives me great pleasure, since we are trying to build with glass, to present this. This is a wee check, and this is... Oh. Michael, can I say, I think you'll never be bold. I'll leave you that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Don't leave it behind. There are plenty of people.
This is wonderful. That's as dramatic as it gets. When my second collection, An Exploded View, was published in 1973, I received a letter of congratulation from Harold Pinter. Fearing it was a hoax, I did not reply. 25 years later, I met Harold in Belfast. He boomed at me, "Did you receive my letter?" With the novelist Glenn Patterson providing a commentary, I drove Harold and Lady Antonia around Belfast, around the wounded parts of the city, what the black taxi drivers call the Troubles Tour. I'm honoured and moved to be here this evening to accept the PEN Pinter Prize and to retrace through poems that circuitous pilgrimage we made together. I've borrowed the title for this talk from Mahler's great song cycle, Kindertotenlieder, Songs for Dead Children. In August 1969, Patrick Rooney, a 9-year-old boy, was struck by a tracer bullet fired by the RUC as he lay in bed in the Divis Flats in the Falls Road district of Belfast. He was the first child to be killed during the Troubles. In helpless response, I wrote Kindertotenlieder. There can be no songs for dead children near the crazy circle of explosions, the splintering tangent of the ricochet. No songs for the children who have become my unrestricted tenants, fingerprints everywhere, teeth marks on this and that. Patrick Rooney haunts me to this day. In my new collection, Angel Hill, I remember him in a short poem called Dusty Bluebells. Patrick Rooney, aged 9, was killed by a tracer bullet where he slept. Boys and girls in his class resumed their games soon after. In and out go dusty bluebells, Bangor boats away. In and out go dusty bluebells, Bangor boats away. The songs from the children's street games reverberate down the decades and sound, in my imagination, for the children killed in Manchester in May this year. The deaths of children, always innocent victims, epitomize the shame of political violence. When I wrote my poem Ghetto about the Holocaust, I found myself focusing on children. Here's the last section, which is about Terezin. Lessons were forbidden in that terrible school. Punishable by death were reading and writing and arithmetic, so that even the junior infants grew old and wise in lofts studying these subjects. There were drawing lessons and drawings of kitchens and farms, farm animals, butterflies, mothers, fathers who survived in crayon until, in pen and ink, they turned into guards at executions and funerals, torturing and hanging even these stick figures. There were drawings of barracks and latrines as well, and the only windows were the windows they drew. Northern Ireland is not a place apart. Its civil war, which killed over 3,500 people, belongs to the dark history of European conflict. In writing about the Troubles, the poets of my generation took their bearings from Yeats and MacNeice, from the poems of Keith Douglas and Alan Lewis in the Second World War, from the great war poets Owen, Sassoon, Rosenberg, Blunden, Gurney, Edward Thomas. We read Brecht, Celan, Apollinaire, Montale, Akhmatova, Rozevich, and we reach back to Homer's Iliad. But from the outset, it has been and still is hugely difficult impossible even, to find in poetry a voice, as Seamus Heaney put it, adequate to our predicament. In a poem called Wounds, which I wrote in 1972, I ask the ghost of my father what he makes of it all. He had joined up as a boy soldier in 1914 and fought in the trenches. Here's the poem's second section. Now, with military honours of a kind, with his badges, his medals like rainbows, his spinning compass, I bury beside him 3 teenage soldiers, bellies full of bullets and Irish beer, their flies undone. A packet of woodbines I throw in, a Lucifer, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, paralysed as heavy guns put out the night light in a nursery forever. Also a bus conductor's uniform. He collapsed beside his carpet slippers without a murmur, shot through the head by a shivering boy who wandered in before they could turn the television down or tidy away the supper dishes. To the children, to a bewildered wife, I think, "Sorry, missus," was what he said. Thank you for quoting that, Eamon, and for your beautiful words, which I'm very grateful for. When the Bogside erupted in 1969 and West Belfast went up in flames, I was flabbergasted by the ferocity of it all. In the summer of 1969, Derek Mahan and I walked through the wreckage of the Falls Road. In a verse letter to him, I saw us as, quote, 2 poetic conservatives in the city of guns and long knives, our ears receiving then and there the stereophonic nightmare of the Shankill and the Falls. As I recalled in an interview I gave in 2003, part of me felt like an appalled outsider. Another part, the anti-unionist, anti-establishment part, felt exhilarated. The rest of me wanted to understand what I had hitherto ignored, the darkness and violence in my own community. From the beginning, my poet friends and I resisted the temptation to hitch a ride on yesterday's headlines, to write the poem of the latest atrocity. We learned from each other how complex the situation was, how inadequate the political certainties, the certainty of a green Ireland, the certainty of an orange Ulster. We knew there was no point in versifying opinion and giving people what they wanted to hear. We believed that poetry, the opposite of propaganda, should encourage people to think and feel for themselves. It should appeal to their generous instinct, as McNeice said in the violent 1930s. We hated what we came to call Trouble's trash. We believed that even when generated by the best of intentions, bad poetry about the sufferings of fellow citizens would be an impertinence. As part of an agenda, it would be a blasphemy. We disliked the notion that civic unrest might be good for poetry, and poetry a solace for the broken-hearted. We were none of us in the front line. So far as I can recall, we never discussed these dilemmas. We had no plans to face up to the crisis as a group or to speak to the outside world about it. we continued to write the poems that presented themselves, no doubt hoping that one day we might produce something adequate about the Troubles. I find that I wrote in 1971, too many critics seem to expect a harvest of paintings, poems, plays, and novels to drop from the twisted branches of civil discord. They fail to realize that the artist needs time in which the raw material of experience may settle to an imaginative depth where it can be transformed into art. We took our time. Paul Muldoon observed that if you didn't write about the Troubles, you might be dismissed as an ostrich. If you did, you might be judged exploitative. Kieran Carson said that his poems were not necessarily about the Troubles, but might be of them. Maeve McGuckian chose as the epigraph to her 1994 collection, Captain Lavender, what Picasso said in 1944. Picasso said, "I have not painted the war, but I have no doubt that the war is in these paintings." Introducing his indispensable anthology, A Rage for Order, Poetry of the Northern Ireland Troubles, Frank Ormsby wrote, "It is arguable that any poem by a Northern Irish writer since 1968, on whatever subject, could be termed a Troubles poem, in that it may consciously or unconsciously reflect the context in which it was written." A French writer once asked me, which side are the poets on? But the true poets resisted demands to take sides. They listened to one another. In a beautiful lyric which preceded the recent Troubles, John Hewitt recalls standing outside a Catholic neighbour's home in the glens of Antrim, too shy to intrude as they say the rosary. At each Hail Mary full of grace, I pictured every friendly face, clenched in devotion of a kind, alien to my breed and mind, easy as breathing, natural as birds that fly, as leaves that fall. Yet with a sense that I still stood far from that faith-based certitude, here in the vast enclosing night, outside its little ring of light. Written during the Troubles, Seamus Heaney's The Other Side responds tenderly to Hewitt's poem and, reversing the situation, speaks from inside the house, from inside the Catholic community. Heaney evokes a Protestant neighbour standing outside their home as the evening prayers are being said. I shall quote the last 10 lines. "But now I stand behind him in the dark yard, in the moan of prayers. He puts a hand in a pocket or taps a little tune with the blackthorn shyly, as if he were party to love-making or a stranger's weeping. Should I slip away, I wonder, or go up and touch his shoulder and talk about the weather or the price of grass seed?" These two poems explore the cultural intricacies of life in Northern Ireland. In the Boundary Commission, Paul Muldoon wittily carries the question of sides, of identity and allegiance even further. You remember that village where the border ran down the middle of the street, with a butcher and baker in different states. Today he remarked how a shower of rain had stopped so cleanly across Golightly's lane, it might have been a wall of glass that had toppled over. He stood there for ages to wonder which side, if any, he should be on. There are delicate balancing acts in this conversation between poems. Perhaps such open-heartedness, reflecting generous instinct elsewhere in the society, suggests why, despite the terrible violence, Ulster never quite descended into the nightmarish mayhem of Bosnia's civil war. Poetic conversations continue to this day. When the Good Friday Agreement was painstakingly achieved, I felt it had, as it needed to have, an almost poetic complexity. To quote Heaney's metaphor, the agreement was about the price of grass seed. In a poem of my own, I called it a fragment from some future unimagined sky. You might say that today, Northern Irish politics more often resemble bad prose. But the peace process is a process. It is far from over. It will take generations. In August 1994, it was rumoured that there might be an IRA ceasefire. At the time, I was reading the passage in the Iliad where the old King Priam bravely visits the mighty Greek general Achilles to beg for the body of Hector, his son, whom Achilles has killed in combat. Priam, in his fragility, awakens in Achilles memories of his own father and rekindles the gentler emotions he has had to suppress in order to be a general. The Iliad is probably our greatest poem about war and death. And this episode is, for me, its soul. I wanted to compress its 200 lines or so into a compact lyric and thereby make my own minuscule contribution to the peace process. I sent the resulting sonnet to the Irish Times. The then literary editor, John Banville, published Ceasefire on the Saturday of the week in which the IRA declared their ceasefire. Here's the poem. Put in mind of his own father and moved to tears, Achilles took him by the hand and pushed the old king gently away. But Priam curled up at his feet and wept with him until their sadness filled the building. Taking Hector's corpse into his own hands, Achilles made sure it was washed and, for the old king's sake, laid out in uniform, ready for Priam to carry, wrapped like a present home to Troy at daybreak. When they had eaten together, it pleased them both to stare at each other's beauty as lovers might. Achilles built like a god, Priam good-looking still and full of conversation, who earlier had sighed, I get down on my knees and do what must be done and kiss Achilles' hand, the killer of my son. In my imagination, I gave Priam the face of Gordon Wilson, the Enniskillen draper who was injured in the 1987 Enniskillen Remembrance Day IRA bomb blast. Trapped under the rubble, he had clasped the hand of his daughter Mary until she lost consciousness. With his arm in a sling, Gordon Wilson appeared on television a few days later and said he forgave his daughter's killers. He had prayed for them. Many people in the town and throughout Ulster were not ready to share these forgiving sentiments. After Ceasefire was published, I was shopping on the Lisburn Road when an acquaintance approached me. "I admired your Achilles poem," he said, "but I'm not ready for it. My son was recently the victim of a vicious paramilitary punishment beating and may never fully recover." This made me question Ceasefire, made me question its redemptive symmetries. So I wrote a sort of lopsided corollary called All of These People. Its 11 lines rehearse earlier elegy. Who was it who suggested that the opposite of war is not so much peace as civilization? He knew our assassinated Catholic greengrocer who died at Christmas in the arms of our Methodist minister, and our ice cream man whose continuing requiem is the 21 flavours children have by heart. Our cobbler mends shoes for everybody. Our butcher blends into his best sausages leeks, barley, honey. Our corner shop sells everything from bread to kindling. Who can bring peace to people who are not civilized? All of these people, alive or dead, are civilized. Civilization, civilized. Earlier, I called the Northern Irish conflict civil war, a term others might contest. Civil war is a kind of oxymoron, since it combines an idea of community with an idea of its fracture. It throws into question, to quote Derek Mahan's poem Afterlives, what is meant by home. Northern Ireland has only 1.5 million inhabitants, so those who died in the Troubles are always, in some sense, intimately known, even across the divisions. In 1999, 4 writers, journalists, David McKittrick, Seamus Kelters, Brian Feeney, and Chris Thornton, compiled an extraordinary dossier of everybody who had been killed up to that date. This unbearably sad book is called Lost Lives. Reading over poems by myself and others, I realized that lost lives have always been at the center of what we write, that the dominant genre of Troubles poetry is elegy, protest elegy perhaps. To refer back to all of these people, our assassinated Catholic greengrocer, I note I use the pronoun our. Our assassinated Catholic greengrocer was Jim Gibson, murdered at Christmas by UDA gunmen who entered his shop on the Stranmillis Road and shot him because, I presume, he was a Catholic prospering in a predominantly Protestant area. My friend Sidney Callahan, the Methodist minister in the poem, happened to be nearby and was able to administer the Catholic last rites. Here's the second part of my elegy for Jim. It sets the Christmas story in West Belfast. Astrologers are 3 wise men who may shortly be setting out for a small house up the Shankill or the Falls, should pause on their way to buy gifts at Jim Gibson's shop, dates and chestnuts and tangerines. The first poem in the Wreaths triptych, The Civil Servant, should really be called The Magistrate. My friend Martin McBurney was a brilliant magistrate and well-known literary figure. As a barrister, he had appeared in unpopular cases involving civil rights issues. The IRA shot Martin as he sat down to breakfast at almost the same time on the same morning as Judge Rory Conaghan, a Catholic, was shot dead. Both men were liberals, a good advertisement for the law. The IRA claimed they had been killed for, quote, collaborating with the British war machine. I disguised Martin McBurney as a civil servant because I didn't want to intrude on the family's grief. I shall read the last two stanzas. He lay in his dressing gown and pyjamas while they dusted the dresser for fingerprints and then shuffled backwards across the garden with notebooks, cameras, and measuring tapes. They rolled him up like a red carpet and left only a bullet hole in the cutlery drawer. Later, his widow took a hammer and chisel and removed the black keys from his piano. The third poem in the triptych, The Linen Workers, is about the King's Mills massacre. In January 1976, 10 workmen were taking their usual route home from the textile factory at Lenan when their bus was stopped. The gunman asked each of them his religion. One man, a Catholic, was told to run away up the road. The other 10 were lined up and machine-gunned. A policeman said the road was an indescribable scene of carnage. That scene was viewed on television screens around the world. By pure chance, I met in a Belfast pub the following day the English cameraman who had filmed the bloody aftermath. I asked him how he managed in such a nightmare. He replied, I take out my light meter and I focus the lens. His stark honesty might provide a template for writers and artists. After Bloody Sunday, Seamus Heaney and I drove to Newry to join the outlawed protest march. The roads and byways had been blocked by police and army. It took us an age to reach Newry and our fellow protesters. We had plenty of time to talk. If we were stopped by paramilitaries and asked our religion, what would we reply? We agreed we would sink or swim by what we were. In our eyes, not so much Catholic and Protestant as honest and brave. In The Linen Workers, I again enlist my father's ghost, and I'll read the last two stanzas, two quatrains. When they massacred the 10 linen workers, there fell on the road beside them spectacles, wallets, small change, and a set of dentures. Blood, food particles, the bread, the wine. Before I can bury my father once again, I must polish the spectacles, balance them upon his nose, fill his pockets with money, and into his dead mouth slip the set of teeth. Each neighbourly murder, Seamus Heaney's devastating phrase, destroys family, poisons the futures of the bereaved, overwhelms small communities. The widows of Jim Gibson and Martin McBurney never fully recovered. When I published Ceasefire, I received a letter from John Maxwell, whose 16-year-old son, Paul, had been blown up with Lord Mountbatten of Mullaghmore in County Sligo. The poem helped him to come to terms with his loss, he said. On the Lisburn Road where I live, the IRA murdered John Larmour, who worked in his brother's ice cream shop. I had been botanising in the Burren in County Clare and had written into my notebook all the wildflowers I could identify in one day. On my return to Belfast, I learned of the murder from my younger daughter Sarah, who had bought with her pocket money some flowers to lay on the pavement outside the shop. I arranged the beautiful flower names from my notebook into an oral wreath to place beside her bouquet. The ice cream man is addressed to Sarah. Rum and raisin, vanilla, butterscotch, walnut, peach. You would rhyme off the flavours. That was before they murdered the ice cream man on the Lisburn Road, and you bought carnations to lay outside his shop. I named for you all the wild flowers of the Burren I had seen in one day. Thyme, valerian, loosestrife, meadowsweet, twayblade, crowfoot, ling, angelica, herb robert, marjoram, cow parsley, sundew, vetch, mountain avens, wood sage, ragged robin, stitchwort, yarrow, lady's bedstraw, bindweed, bog pimpernel. I want that catalogue to go on forever, like a prayer. When the poem was published, I received a heartbreaking letter thanking me and pointing out that there were coincidentally 21 ice cream flavours in the shop and 21 flower names. The letter was signed Rosetta Larmour, the ice cream man's mother. I have since got to know George Larmour, the ice cream man's brother. Obsessively and all on his own, he has laboured to uncover the murky secrets behind his brother's death. Last year, George published a book about his brother. It's called They Killed the Ice Cream Man. I recommend it to you. Several poems with their roots in the Troubles happen to be masterworks. I would name, for example, Derek Mahon's A Disused Shed in County Wexford, Seamus Heaney's Casualty, Paul Muldoon's Gathering Mushrooms, Maeve McGuckian's Drawing Ballerinas, Kieran Carson's Dresden, Colette Bryce, Frank Ormsby, Tom Pollan, Sinead Morrissey, Leontia Flynn, Peter MacDonald, Nick Laird have all extended our imaginative estate in troubled times. From across the border, Paul Durkin has paid by far the closest and most pained attention to Northern Ireland's turmoil. And Alan Gillis has written a miracle poem called Progress. It goes back over the nightmare ground I've been trying to cover in this lecture. Here's his poem. They say that for years Belfast was backwards, and it's great now to see some progress. So I guess we can look forward to taking boxes from the earth. I guess that ambulances will leave the dying back amidst the rubble to be explosively healed. Given time, 100,000 particles of glass will create impossible patterns in the air before coalescing into the clarity of a window, through which a reassembled head will look out and admire the shy young man taking his bomb from the building and driving home. I'm humbled to share the PEN Pinter Prize with Mahvash Sabet, an Iranian poet condemned in 2010 to 20 years in prison, simply because of her Baha'i faith and her work on behalf of the Baha'i community. Her poems can be desolate. No one listens. No one hears this wingless bird. And again, you can't see the sorrow after lights out. I long for the dark, the total blackout. But Mahvash is at heart a lyrical poet who sings the beauty of the world. Her imagination is rhapsodic. Her poems want to soar. My heart longs for the soft breath of the wind, blowing over the lonely pool where the reflected moon trembles below the lawn in the blue waters. She is a songbird trapped in a cage. Her incarceration by the Iranian authorities is a sin against the light. In her poem Revenge, Mahvash writes of her poetry, and I put this as an epigraph to my lecture. I have written a message on a nasturtium leaf and hung it on my door like a charm. It says, "There's a warm heart waiting here and a mother's open arms." I shall end my lecture with a short poem, a very short poem from my most recent collection, Angel Hill. The Troubles is a poem about its own title. Think of the children behind the coffins. Look sorrow in the face. Call those 30 years the years of disgrace. Thank you for listening to me. As I said, I'm honoured to be able to share this year's PEN Pinter Prize with Mahvash Sabet. One of the group of 7 Baha'i leaders known as the Yaran Iran, Friends of Iran, Mahvash was detained in 2008 along with 6 others for their faith and activities related to running the affairs of the Baha'i community in Iran. They were held for 20 months without charge and eventually sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. These sentences were later reduced to 10 years each after a delayed application of the 2013 Penal Code to the case. They never received official copies of the original verdict or the ruling on appeal despite repeated requests. Marvellous news now. Mahvash was finally released last month, having spent almost a decade imprisoned in Iran, and she is now back with her friends and family. I rejoice that she has been released from prison. As I've said, her incarceration by the Iranian authorities was a sin against the light. The power of dictators to silence and imprison writers continues to put all heaven in a rage. And I'd like to invite Bahia Nakjavani, who has done brilliant translations of Mahvash's poetry. really lovely, clean, fresh translations, and who has come all the way from Strasbourg to be with us tonight.
Dear friends, I feel as if I'm here as a metaphor because I'm not Mahvash, and so I'm a substitute for someone who really deserves to have been with you and who would have loved to have heard every single word that has been just said by Michael Longley. I have here a short speech which I will read on her behalf. Dear friends, esteemed hosts, honourable guests, Mr. Michael Longley, members of PEN, ladies and gentlemen. 10 years of my life have just passed behind bars, and as I re-enter the world, I find myself given this incredible award. It is a wonder to me and a mystery. Coming back into the light after these 10 long years in darkness has not been easy. The changes I see all round me are truly astonishing. The pace of life is overwhelming. But the hardest thing for me is to know that even though I am walking free, many other friends and colleagues still remain behind bars. So, in the midst of my wonder, I am filled with anguish. I am torn between joy and sorrow at this moment. And in thanking you for this great honour, I would like to speak also on behalf of all whose rights and freedoms have been deprived. This is what PEN did for me by championing my cause. This is what you are doing for so many poets and writers in the world. When I suffered in prison, your compassion sustained me. All through these dark years, your sincere support encouraged me. You are an example of advocacy to people of goodwill everywhere, including journalists and activists among my own compatriots, and even certain clerics in Iran. Thank you. But the person to whom I owe my deepest gratitude today is to you, sir, Mr. Michael Longley, the poet of Belfast. You have found words for the suffering in your country. You write with an honesty, a directness, and a courage that I admire with all my heart. To be your chosen writer of courage is a distinction I will try to deserve for the rest of my life. How I wish I could be with you on this occasion. How I hope I might meet you one day. Thank you for the honour you have given me. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation once again to PEN and its respected members all over the world, and to those who have helped to translate my work in so many languages. Thank you all. Mahvash Sabet. Thank you.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I truly appreciate your consideration for this precious award. I really appreciate your kind support which has been a strong and powerful source to make me tolerate that harsh time. As you know, poem has opened a very significant opportunity to me to express myself and share my experiences with the world. I would like to appreciate that amazing gesture of Mr. Longley that has shared his award with me, and warmest love and deepest gratitude to dear Bahia Khanum Nakhjavani and her unique and priceless family and the other translators for all their efforts in presenting my poems in the way they has done. I would like to share a poem in Persian and dedicate to Mr. Longley. I hope you. وقتی او مرد سحر امروز زنی اینجا مرد وقتی او مرد دیگر امواج نفسهایش روی آن ساحل پرماسه سرد توده خیس صدفها را با خود نکشید و درون نفسش شیشه هایی کم کم خرد شدند. وقتی او مرد چراغی که به رنگ علف زرد بیابان بود بی حالت شد و نگاهش دیگر در پی هیچ کسی خیره نبود و دم از بازدمش غافل شد. وقتی او مرد زنی از راه رسید بی تفاوت گویا برگ کاج زردی را بیدرنگ در یک کیسه گذاشت و درش را هم بست. همه چیز به همین آسانی. وقتی او مرد هیچ کس فکر نکرد رنگ آن پروانه از چه رو آبی شد. هیچ کس فکر نکرد موقع مرگ چه خوابی میدید و گل داوودی چه به گوشش میگفت و کسی فکر نکرد شمع او را چه کسی میافروخت و کسی فکر نکرد رفتنش آیا مثل آن بود که در رویا داشت. همه گفتند طفلکی راحت شد و من اینجا دیدم کیسه‌اش را که به اندازه یک گندم بود مورچه‌ای با خود برد و غذایش را که به اندازه یک گلدان بود کرمی از آب گرفت و من اینجا دیدم از پس پنجره چشمانش می‌ترانید گل آرامش و دهانش پر بود از غزل‌های خضوع. آسمان روشن خط لب‌هایش را آبی کرد. ماه با بازی نور گونه‌هایش را مهتابی کرد و من اینجا دیدم شاید از دور کسی به سراغش آمد و کسی شاید شاخه نور به دستش میداد که سرانگشتانش روشن شد و کسی به گمانم تا عرش به همراهش رفت و نمیدانم شاید جایی بالا خانه‌ای یافت به اندازه یک حس دعا و کسی او را برد تا به دیدار خدا و خدا شاید جایی در عرش روی یک سکوی مبهم نور در حبابی از احساس سرور لقمه آرامش لقمه عشق به او میبخشید و خدا شاید رنجهایش را باور کرد.
This is the translation of the poem. It's called When She Died. A woman died here early this morning. When she died, the waves of her breath beating one by one against these clammy sands, failed at last to pull back all the wet shells piled inside and shattered one by one like glass against the shore. When she died, the light in her face, fading yellow as the blown grass of the wilderness, dimmed at last, her glance no longer fixed as she gave up the task of breathing one long sigh, and then no more. And when she died, a female guard, uncaring, came at last to stuff her in a bag, indifferent, as if she were no more than a branch of pine needles, dried up. It was as simple as that, the morning that she died. No one asked why the moth's wings had turned blue. No one wondered what she had been thinking, or whether the chrysanthemum had murmured to her, bending at her ear beside death's door. And no one asked who'd lit the candle at her passing, or if her going had been what she'd dreamed before. All they said was, well, the poor thing's free at last. And I witnessed it. Her bundle of things so frail, an ant could have carried it off like a grain of wheat. And I witnessed it. Her food, a crumb of bread, so small that a worm in the water could have swallowed it. And I witnessed it. But behind her glassy eyes, there lay a faint bloom of tranquility, and her mouth was filled with the ghazals of humility. Her lips were lined with the clear azure of the skies, and her cheeks were pale as the moon playing with sunrise. And I witnessed it. Maybe someone was coming to meet her from afar, to greet her with a branch of blossoming light, for the tips of her fingers had become translucent. Or maybe someone was taking her by the hand and was leading her perhaps to other lands. Who knows, maybe she found a home at last, just big enough for the sense of a prayer. Or perhaps someone took her to see God up in the higher realms somewhere, and maybe he gave her a shelter there, a threshold she might call her own, and offered her just enough shade for joy, for a mouthful of peace, for the taste of love, and maybe God at least believed in her sufferings.
Thank you. I'm Antonia Byatt, the Director of English PEN. So wonderful to hear Mahvash's voice, voice alive, live in this room as it should be, rather than locked away. And so wonderful, thank you, Bahai, for the English versions of her poetry and of her speech tonight. For me, it's a real honour and a privilege to stand here, both with Mahvash in the background and with Michael Longley, whose work I've admired for such a long time myself. Thank you for such a very powerful and resonant lecture tonight. It's a testament to what you said in it, that poetry, the opposite of propaganda, encourages people to think and feel for themselves. I'm really, truly delighted that you've chosen to give the Writer of Courage Award to Mahvash Sabet. At the Pinter Prize last year, Jack Glanville, who was the director then, mentioned her as a writer who was still imprisoned at that time. So it's wonderful and incredible that she is finally free. We've continued to raise her case over the last few years, and I'd like to thank all the writers who've read her work at festivals, as well as those that wrote new work inspired by Mahvash's work for the PEN Modern Literature Festival. I've been very struck by what Mahvash has said since her release of how time stood still for her and how fast the outside world has changed, particularly in an age of technology, if you think what has happened over the last 10 years. And I'd like to thank all the individuals who wrote to her in prison, sent her books, and wrote to the authorities. Voices from the outside are incredibly important. The PEN Pinter Prize is an award that celebrates the greatest literary achievement alongside the defenders of freedom of speech, many of whom, like Mahvash, have risked their liberty and their lives. It's a prize that continues Pinter's legacy and PEN's mission, bringing writers together from across the world in a community of solidarity. We continue at English PEN to bring the attention to the case of imprisoned blogger Raif Badawi in Saudi Arabia. Raif was awarded the 2015 PEN Pinter Prize for an International Writer of Courage, and we continue to hold monthly vigils for him at the Saudi Embassy in London. And we're also working for the release of our former writer-in-residence, Ahmed Shuk. Ahmed is one of the many journalists currently detained in Turkey following the unprecedented crackdown on the media in the wake of last year's failed coup. I know many of you here tonight support us in very many ways, and a huge thank you to those of you that do that. And any of you who are not members, you really must join us and help us campaign for writers like Mahvash. You're all incredibly lucky that you'll get a very special edition of the lecture to take home tonight and to read again and again and again. And Michael is very happy to sign books too in the foyer outside. So it just remains for me to say congratulations, Michael Longley, and celebrations for Mahvash Sabet. Thank you.